Okay, I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Urbana City Council for Monday, December 9th, 2024. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu.
Here.
Mr. Evans.
Here.
Ms. Hersey.
Here.
Ms. Colasetti.
Here.
Ms. Bishop.
Here.
Ms. Wilkin.
Here.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Here.
Mayor Marlin.
Here. Next item is approval of minutes from the November 18th, 2024 meeting. Is there a motion for approval?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Mary Alice. Was that Sharice? Okay. Any
Yep.
substantial changes? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? That motion passes. Are there any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to presentations and public input. We have one presentation scheduled tonight. We'll do that first, and that'll be followed by public input. This is a presentation by the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission, their annual report, and I believe Audrey Ishii and Annie Adams will be given the report, both members of the BPAC, and you'll have 10 minutes.
Hello, I'm Audrey Ishii. I'm the acting chair. I'm the vice chair and acting chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. And sitting with me is Annie Adams, who was elected acting vice chair. And this is a report for an annual report for actually 2 years, covering the period since Bill Brown left in June of 2023. Actually covering all of 2023, but Bill Brown was actually the chair for part of it. Here you see a photograph of the future of Urbana. This is the place where students are experiencing health, fun, and freedom, getting around town under their own steam. As you can see, the bike racks are totally full. This is also true at the middle school. I know I substitute at both and had struggled to find a place to put my bike, especially on a gorgeous day like this. But it's a real testament to the policies and the support that the City of Urbana and the MTD and have given to Safe Routes to School and other similar programs. Okay. I'm not going to read the bylaws of the BPAC. You have this all in your packet, of course, but I want to draw your attention to a fundamental mandate that BPAC has, which is to advise the City Council on bicycle and pedestrian issues, things that impact our ability, our safety, and our just plain pleasure and joy in bicycling and walking around this wonderful city. Also, we are emphasizing in this last couple of years really making action plans for making improvements that we don't just talk about, but actually see implemented. And this commission is a relatively large commission with 11 members. We need 6 members for a quorum, and we very rarely lack that. But I would want to draw your attention. Oh, I also want to especially honor the people who were members for just part of the last 2 years. They all provided major contributions, and I'll get into that in just a bit. And I also want to draw your attention to the fact that, except for very short periods, an Urbana City Council member or former member has always chaired BPAC, and this is very important for the organic nature of input and response with the council communications. We've come to realize that in order to fulfill that part of our mandate, we really have to start producing resolutions, basically, or recommendations that we send to council, because we just don't have that channel that we used to have. But we certainly welcome anyone who's considering joining BPAC. We would love to have you. Next, I have a rather dense list of reviews that we've accomplished over the past couple years. As I mentioned, BPAC very rarely cancels. We've probably had 10 meetings a year, so this might represent 20 meetings of reviews as well as other things. However, boiling it down to those things that we felt we needed to have a recommendation passed by vote in order to forward it to council. You may recall some of these, the Safe Streets and Roads for All to help fund Vision Zero and help fund Vision Zero Task Force. And also we suggested a speed management plan, traffic calming demonstration. I'll get into the need for that in a bit. And I also want to remind you that just before Bill Brown left, he forwarded a couple resolutions regarding parking in bike lanes and also East University Avenue recommendations or comments on the IDOT project. And there has been really good progress on both those things, thanks to the city and you guys and the mayor and John Zeman. Mentioning John Zeman, he is now leaving BPAC, as you saw there, but he served on it almost 3 years since he joined the city, and he really has brought some awesome changes, one of them being to push out proactive goals for BPAC instead of just being reactive with all those reviews I showed you. And I'm not going to go through this list that you have in your packet. I'm going to talk about what we're especially focused on tonight. These were goals that BPAC could have probably discussed for months on end. John showed us how you get things done. He put up a survey, he posted the results, and boom, we had our goals. He also suggested that this annual report be a little bit more theme-based rather than project-based, so you have John to thank for what you're going to see tonight. Okay, BPAC has also served as the nascent Vision Zero Task Force, and we continue to promote those formal strategies that are endorsed by the Vision Zero Network, which is just a formidable source of information. It's overwhelming, the webinars and the resources that they have. It's absolutely wonderful, and it's supported by grants, so it's cost-free. At present, we're working on two main challenges. How do we prioritize community equity and community engagement, and what can we do to manage speed for safety? And we'll get into why we've fallen on speed as a safety maneuver. It helps so much that under Pete Buttigieg, the U.S. DOT now supports community efforts to incorporate safe systems, that is, looking at the whole system for car crashes, to recognize that there's also no acceptable number of deaths and serious injuries on our streets. He has created the Safe Streets for All grant, which you have received resolutions on, so I'm not going to go into that right now, but we will talk about the traffic calming options that are available under that. Why does it matter? Unfortunately, since the pandemic, the traffic death rate in the U.S. went up to over 40,000. It had been under 40,000 for a number of years. It started rising again. You might even think that we're almost in a war, and it is actually a war. It's a war being waged by the fossil fuel and auto industries against the American people. And the most innocent casualties have to be the unarmored, vulnerable road users, people on foot and on bike, whose death rates have increased even faster than the overall rates, now accounting for almost 20% of traffic deaths nationally. The lack of access to vehicles, the segregation and division of low-income and black neighborhoods with dangerous roadways have resulted in the worst impacts falling on people of color. Ironically, first, the people who were here first, the Native Americans, followed by black Americans. The dynamic of fast roads serving as barriers between the resourced and the under-resourced plays out even in Urbana historically.
The comprehensive plan illustrates this situation. There are hundreds of residents along East Main, some pushing strollers to shop at Aldi and Walmart. Ironically, while East Main, coming from downtown, is 30 miles per hour through the long, houseless stretches of road passing the Public Safety Training Center and the County Highway Department, it suddenly shifts to 35 miles per hour as we come to these neighborhoods dense with housing. Of course, we need the emergency managers and highway engineers safe, but we also need people raising families to be safe. This is why BPAC has called on the city to immediately reduce the speed on East Main Street. Why does speed matter? Because people make mistakes, and when they do, the severity of the impact on the human body is based on the speed. Even 5 miles per hour makes a big difference. Look at this 10 mile per hour increase in speed from 20 to 30. The death rate increased by 800%. But in addition to this, they are simply less likely to crash because they have a wider field of view, more time to react, and the car slows faster. The auto industry is building heavier pickups and SUVs, and electric vehicles are even heavier. And there are front grills that are dangerous, and there are distractions in vehicles from screens and phones. The National Association of City Transportation Officials calls for a 20 or 25 mile per hour speed limit in urban areas, residential and business. There are 22 states that have set these limits, and these are not coastal elite states. Many are in the West, where they have highway speeds that are set to 80 miles per hour. And they slow folks down when they enter the communities where people live and provide services and goods.
Okay, cities don't pay the cost of traffic crashes. The automobile industry came up with the concept of private insurance and federal standards to shift the blame and costs to individuals instead. If cities had to pay even a fraction of the cost of crashes, you can be sure no city would have a speed limit over 10 or 15, and the streets would be nearly crash-proof. But one cost the cities still pick up is the cost of police, which in Urbana is estimated at 3 FTEs annually, usually called upon in multiple units. The most dangerous time to be a child in America is pickup time at schools, which is 3 p.m. here in this graph of the police calls in Urbana.
Is there a motion to extend? Mary Alice?
I move to extend for 5 minutes.
Second.
All
Thank
those
you.
in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? Okay.
Aye.
Thank you. For the 10 years from 1998 to 2007, Urbana averaged 1.2 traffic deaths per year. But then in the more recent 10-year period covered in the LRTP available at that time, it almost doubled to 2.1. But even more alarming is that the deaths of pedestrians went from 3 in the first period to 10 in the more recent period, almost tripling. And what is the possible reason for that? We're going to take a quick look at how we can compare to our sister city. In Urbana, 21% of people commute to work by walking or biking. And this is from the LRTP 2050 that you guys are looking to endorse tonight. In Champaign, just 12% do. In Urbana, 19.2% households lack vehicle access. In Champaign, 15.2% do. Also, MTD usage is almost double in Urbana at 9% compared to 5% for Champaign. And this may lead to this startling graph which shows per 100,000, the earlier period compared to the later period, Champaign actually had a decline for this period in pedestrian fatalities. In Urbana, we went from 3 the earlier year period to 10 pedestrian deaths. On a per capita basis, it's more startling and bigger than Champaign, though the actual number was also bigger. Also, there's around, according to the LRTP 2050, there are around 15 pedestrian crashes a year, and around 30% area-wide result in serious injuries, life-changing injuries. So what can we do to ensure that people in our wonderful walkable city continue to live their whole lives with us?
But these people are not statistics. The obituaries, are we on? Yep,
Yes.
We're on this page. All right, sorry. The obituaries of every one of these people killed in Urbana are online and easy to find. They were beautiful people, every one of them. They do not deserve less than the moving tributes that were paid to the recent tragic death of a state trooper. I think that if we were able to muster that level of recognition for every victim of our traffic system, we would find a way to end them. Joseph Wilski was a Navy veteran and retired News-Gazette photographer and was killed in a wheelchair vehicle doing what Urbana hopes that many more will do, shopping and living in downtown Urbana. People belong on these streets, and cars belong on these streets, but they need to be at speeds that humans, with all their quirks and flaws, can thrive and enjoy.
And we'll take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Mary Alice?
So you had used a phrase that I'm not entirely sure what it was, but I was wondering if BPAC has talked about the electric bikes, the electric skateboards, and the electric scooters that are prolific now in our community.
Yes, Bruce Michelson. That is a particular interest of Bruce Michelson, the retired university professor, U of I professor, and he has regularly reminded us and arranged for presentations on that topic. And so one of the main resolution that we came out with was asking all the communities, and John Zeman was to present this at RPC, to ask all the communities to coordinate our response to that, because obviously changing the rules as you cross from the U of I to Champaign would not be helpful. Another concern he has, and we're hoping to hear from the fire department on this, is the batteries, which are really, as you probably are aware, pretty dangerous, especially if they're not UL listed. Of course, there's ways to certify them, but the likelihood that we have dangerous batteries around is probably high, and I'm sure the fire department is going to be on top of that, and we hope to hear from them.
And the term is micromobility.
Thank you.
And it's
I was
yeah, I know.
looking-
Yeah, I know. And it's growing. And it's not going away. There was a hope. I think at some point people were hoping it would go away. It is not going to go away. It is how people get around. When they heat map our rental bike services, you see people using them to go to and from their jobs. So this is something that we're going to have to accommodate for. We're going to have a lot more people in our bike lanes. They're going to be going at speeds that are above people who are not using electrified vehicles. So these are just things we're going to have to start being aware of and start building for.
And then my last question is, has there been any conversation about asking bikes not to be on sidewalks in campus area? Right now, it's only banned in downtown. So I've had business owners ask me if there was any discussion in terms of not allowing bicycles on sidewalks in campus town.
No, I have not heard about that. I've only heard about the issues in the downtown city, and we've have discussed a number of possible responses for that, but I was not aware there
I
was
can
a
follow up
campus
with you.
By
problem.
campus town, you mean the Champaign side?
No, Urbana.
Urbana side.
Urbana
Gregory.
side. Goodwin, Gregory, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that'll be, I'd be
Have
interested about that.
you've heard from the owners
Yes.
there? Okay.
Yeah, that'd be good to know about that. And as I'm sure everyone here knows, our streets are owned and managed by the university, by the county, by the state, by us. So there's a wide variety of ownership going on. So there's a lot of negotiating that happens between all these different entities when we have issues of people not following proper laws.
Geo.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation and for the communication. I've been playing kind of email tag for a while with some folks. My question is more for the mayor of how do we get someone back on from council onto the commission? Because I've been been interested since day one, but Bill Brown was kind enough to stay on after his term. So I'll just put it out there that I definitely agree that there needs to be more communication with BPAC and the city council. I think there's some amazing ideas that are being developed in BPAC and not making it to us. So I guess that's a question / volunteering, if I can be on more than one thing since I'm technically on another board.
I think there's a vacancy, so yes. And we'll send you an application. Any other questions?
Yes, I have something to say.
Go ahead, Sharice.
Yeah, the subject that Mary Alice brought up about the electric bikes and so on and so forth, and I know I've actually watched people on these bikes run red lights. One young man came just a heartbeat away from getting hit by a truck because he just ran the red light on Bradley and Lincoln going east. And I don't know what it is about those particular vehicles, so to speak, but they seem to embolden people to not follow regular traffic rules. And I want to know if there's any kind of education or information types of seminars or something that can be done to inform people that they still have to follow traffic rules right along, you know, like any other vehicle, and probably even more so when you're on the electric bicycles. Is there any kind of information forum that people can go to regarding that?
I'd say one thing to really be aware of that we're struggling with, because we have the exact same question as you. A lot of folks aren't getting their driver's license anymore. So that real basic moment when all of us were behind a wheel and we saw, oh my gosh, I don't see pedestrians and I don't see bikes, folks are not having that experience anymore. So a lot of people aren't even going through the basic steps of getting a driver's license. So first off, we're going to be dealing with that. Second off, one of the running jokes on BPAC is we can teach you to play football, but we're not going to teach you to ride a bike and swim, which are like two things you might do the rest of your life. And so there is definitely an educational component that we would be interested in trying to find a way to ramp up. Every year we would like the university to maybe do like just a large educational outreach effort. But I can let Audrey, there's the Illinois Bike Survey, which is one method. What other thoughts do you have on that?
I agree that I think our attention will be laser focused when we have the first really serious injury or fatality. I'm so sorry that we have to be reactive like that instead of proactive. And I agree with you, absolutely, Sharice. I don't know how it hasn't happened already from what I've seen. Again, if we do have a U of I representative on our BPAC, Sarthak, yeah. So I can't think of his last name. Prasad. Yeah. So yes, we do want to talk to Bruce Michelson about this and arrange for an effort to, again, coordinate with the agencies that can help with this.
I mean, we'd even like bike education if we could somehow get into the schools, the grade schools, the middle schools, the high schools. People need to understand like just the basic rules of the road and how to ride a bike. There's also lighting issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely frightening. And I can just tell you, like, I was a younger person who did not have bikes on, I was riding in many big cities, Chicago, Minneapolis, without a bike helmet, without lights on the front or back of my bike, and I thought I was perfectly safe. So you're also dealing with young thoughts, a person being young. And now, like, when I ride a bike, I look like a Mardi Gras float, and I have, like, you know, bright helmet and everything. But ideally, I'd love to get people there a little sooner than it took me to get there.
Next, we have time for
I really fear for the lives of some of the kids that I see using these bicycles in my area, in my ward, and totally unsafe. Like, I don't know, like they think they're Iron Man or something, and it's scary for me to watch this young man. You know, Lincoln and Bradley. That's a serious intersection. And he was just going across like there was no stop sign. and he came very dangerously close to getting hit. It's I think it's incumbent not just on the drivers of cars, but everybody to think about safety. And it's safety first, so to speak.
It does.
When they are using any kind of vehicle like that.
It does seem like another case of technology getting ahead of human capabilities. It's so very frightening.
Okay, I just wanted to, state that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Grace, did you have any questions or comments?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time, everyone.
Okay, we'll move on to public input. If anyone wishes to address the council, please step up to the microphone.
Hey, good evening. My name's Brian Maxwell. I live over in East Urbana. I wanted to come in tonight to talk about, I heard that on the agenda tonight, there's going to be some voting on some money that was set aside previously for the police substation in Southeast Urbana off Philo Road. I think that this sounds like this is probably just a clerical vote to confirm the money or move it around. And while it would be great to see that money put towards something else, if it's possible, even if it does end up moving into the police department, I would encourage the city to reconsider other uses for this money that could benefit the community more. You know, it feels like, again, we're just over policing lower income neighborhoods in this country and in this community. We had some really good feedback last time, you know, a few months ago when we were talking about the alternative responder task force. I thought there was a really great presentation from the Well Experience, who went through a pretty serious effort, I thought, to put together a whole presentation, very clearly laying out why people in that community don't necessarily feel like more police presence is in their best interest. I thought that was really useful feedback from people in that community. And as some more data points, recently the local chapter of the PSL went around in this neighborhood, around the Silverthorne and Vaughter streets, around the area where this police station would be, and talked to residents in that area about what they thought about the proposed police substation off Philo Road. And you can read all the interviews that they had for people on the Prairie Liberation Center website. It's available. I'm just going to read a few excerpts here from people in that neighborhood. One resident, so there was a shooting here this past summer and I rendered first aid to the victim. My name was put out in the police report even after I told them I didn't want to be named or my address to be included. They put our residence on my vehicle on TV. People recognized it and called. If people think I snitched, I would have been in danger. I was the only person to give any info at that point. During the shooting, when I rendered aid, a man came out, talked to the police, and immediately put his house up for sale the next day for fear of retaliation. If police are here, they could see things firsthand instead of relying on witnesses. He had to instantly get off and come home because if people in the neighborhood knew I talked to the police, I'd get in trouble. Another resident here. They feel like they have this authority, like they have a badge and a gun, and they can treat us anyway. That's not fair. If police make us feel like they are really here to protect and serve and not abuse your authority or make us feel like dirt, we'll feel like it's worth it for the police to be here and that we need them. They need to do more research and background checks into who they hire to do this for our kids and us. We don't want to die. That's how that one ended. Another quote, I've lived in Urbana my whole life, and in this area 6 years. Since I've been in this area, every year I've seen someone shot and someone stabbed. There are things here that could warrant a substation, but there could also be outreach. There are no YMCAs or Boys and Girls Clubs out here. You can have more police and more security, but unless the community comes together to get things done, it won't happen. So there's a bunch more interviews like that, that I just think that these are conversations that I feel like I can't tell if the city's really considering these perspectives when it talks about putting a police substation in this neighborhood, and it feels like there could be more conversations had with people in that community before it's moved forward. So I just ask that you consider that. You know, I've also put back there on the table some really great informational material that was put together by the CU Reparations Coalition. It's about really the whole history of segregated communities in this town, and basically how we're really still living with the impact of that in this town. And once again, it feels like our solution to that is over policing these areas, and we've seen, you know, for the last 60 years in this country, that might be a good short-term fix, but in the long term, it just you know, leaves these communities worse off if it's not met by, you know, additional funding for other programs in these communities, you know, resources for housing, youth programs, job opportunities, and stuff like that. So I just asked the city to reconsider using that money for that. Thanks.
Does anyone else wish to speak?
Take this down for her.
Sure, go ahead and take it off.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Eva. I'm 9 years old. I live in Urbana, Illinois. I'm mostly going to be speaking about why we should have police officers in our community. We should have police officers in our community because they help protect us, and if they're more closer to us, they can get to us faster. And if there's a shooting, he can catch the culprit more faster, and then it can be more safer because they catch them more faster. I think the police is trusted by many, many people because they come out to block parties and interact even if they're on duty. Like this one time at a ice cream show, a police officer and a few kids were teaching him how to ride a hoverboard when he was on duty. After that, every time they saw him, they would say hi. This is the police showing their true colors, which is pretty kind. Please approve this so that Zephyr and my friends over there can be more safe.
I'm not used to these things either. It's been a long time. This way too. Good evening, everyone. My name is Giovanna Di Benedetto. I'm a resident, longtime resident of Urbana, and also the executive director for Silver Hearts. I would like to first of all thank all of you for the work that you do to serve the residents of Urbana. I would also like to thank two of my Silver Hearts partners in crime, so to speak, that are here tonight with me for support and just taking a stand on helping us to rebuild things over there. That is Jeremy Overman and Neil Wieslow. 9 years ago, the area of Silver Water was known, which is now known as Silverwood, was plagued by crime. Robberies, drug dealing, and shootings were the norm. It was the worst area in Urbana. Everyone had lost trust in each other, social service agencies and landlords, the police and the residents. It was a broken community and no one knew how to repair it. That is how Silver Hearts was born. Residents reached out to all of these people, agencies, and together we made a path forward. Relationships were made over time and trust was rebuilt. I need my water. I need water, I'm sorry, guys. We brought social services directly into the neighborhood by way of my apartment, as anyone that was around the knows. We had events like block parties and ice cream socials that took away all the social barriers. People didn't know who was who. We didn't know who was poor, who had nice cars, who lived where. We all were just people getting to know each other. We invited city employees, the fire department, the Urbana Park Police Department, just to come hang out with us. The results were incredible. We saw each other for who we are, people. People that want a community that is safe, a community that we can be proud of. Over time, people saw that they were cared about. They could access social services easier, the police could be trusted, and their lives improved. I sat by their side as they applied for services, helped DV victims find safe places to go and come up with plans, safety plans, etc. And I even sat there while the police showed up and people filed police reports in a safe environment. We all worked together. every single one of us. My children got dragged along back then, and now they're here tonight to take a stand and to say how important this community engagement offices are. Why this history lesson on Silver Hearts? Because when I moved to another area, that easy access went away, and it shows. Sadly, things are once again broken, and people are afraid to visit there and to live there. You have taken the first step by approving the money for the community engagement offices. Now we simply ask that you honor your commitment that you made to us by voting to correct a simple accounting mistake. Mistakes happen. But please vote to fix this so that we can move forward and rebuild Silverwood to the awesome area that we know and love. Thank you.
Carol, Mitten, is there any way you can check the cords on the timer, because it did die during a prior speaker? I have been keeping time on my phone. I think we can still proceed with public input, but in the meantime, I just ask that we make sure that the cords are all plugged in for that, and I will go ahead and restart my timer.
Thank you, and please state your name for the record. You'll have 5 minutes.
My name is Jeremy Overman. I'm not a resident of Urbana, but I live in Champaign. I've done volunteer work as part of Silver Hearts community in the Silverwood neighborhood for many years, even before the formation of this nonprofit organization. I've seen firsthand the positive impact of community activities and the presence of community outreach groups in this neighborhood. During the summer, I met 2 residents of the neighborhood who live in one of the apartments. They reported there was much fear among their neighbors, and many were afraid to leave their apartments due to the threat of crime and violence. A community engagement office of the police would increase the sense of safety among residents of this neighborhood and would provide a deterrence to crime. I advocate for the approval of the community engagement office. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Larry Lister. I live in Ward 2, Urbana. And I'm attending the public comment tonight in support of the previously approved funding, just like the last few speakers are, and it's going to be hard to outdo those. And we appreciate the work you did over with Silver Hearts. But the community engagement team idea is something that I think is important, and I think so for 2 reasons. One, our community and city leaders, those of you sitting here tonight, spent a lot of time and resources to bring Chief Boone here to do this kind of thing. This is it's a new thing that has been proposed, and it came from these very chambers. The other is that putting the resources, as was said better by the last speakers, putting the resources closer to where they're needed not only allows them to engage in the community, not to over-police, but to at least to have those relationships and to get those relationships going again, similar to what Silver Hearts did. And also, it keeps friends of mine that live just down the street here in East Urbana, that are also in Ward 2, complained to me one day when I was talking to them. He said, the police are all shooting through the neighborhood heading south. And they felt it was kind of dangerous. And I said, well, I know they know how to do that, and they have to be careful doing it. But one of the things of putting the resources in the right place is to avoid having to roll a resource from some other part of town all the way over to South Urbana when there is an issue occurring. So, pretending for a minute that this carve-out, which is kind of what we called it when I worked in Washington, that this carve-out is about the cost. I work with construction costs every day as an engineer, labor, material, change orders, and the like. I expected something on the order of $80,000 to $100,000 for a tenant fit-out for the type of facility that police would need with technology, IT, infrastructure, furniture, and whatnot. So I was surprised when I saw that it was that $45,000 for a TFO was what was being asked for that line item. There's a few members of council that have mentioned over time and publicly and in talking to me that sometimes we don't have an idea for how much some of this stuff costs, and that's understandable and that's okay if it's not something you deal with in your day-to-day life. But if you don't, I would just ask that you consider other people who do and give a listen and try to potentially recalibrate where you're at when it comes down to whether something's too expensive or whether somebody's making too much money or not enough. So that's the cost piece of it, but I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. I don't think this is about cost. I think it's about the advancing this defunder strategy that is still seems to be pervading life here in Urbana. And we delay the start of making any meaningful change, and it's change that we've already invested in. We're not just talking about starting to maybe hire somebody. We've already done it. So I sought out some dissenting opinions and read from the Prairie Liberation Center, and I found it to be pretty informative. And I read a lot of the community members' messages, and they were quite nuanced and they were quite all over the map. And all of them were good points. You know, some expressed a desire for a safer community, but unsurprisingly, the most negative of those was the fear of the police. And we know why that is, and it's understandable. We see it in the national media all the time, but we're not Minneapolis, and we're not Ferguson, we're not Memphis, we're not Louisville, and we're not Springfield. City leaders understood this and took positive steps to bring Chief Boone here. We hired him for this very reason. And he's worked that fear and he's lived it. And as he stated publicly, he knows how to do this. And I believe his experience in this outweighs any of ours in this room. So in closing, the budget was already approved once. Oh, all right, I can turn my stuff in later.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Does anyone wish to address the council? Okay, thank you for your comments. We'll move on to council input and communication. Chris.
Thank you. This is from Dr. Stephanie Cockrell, the Executive Director of the Well Experience. I must continue to express my deep concern regarding the decisions that have been made, particularly in light of the historical context surrounding policing in communities of color and the ongoing challenges faced by families living in poverty. The decision to place a satellite police station in an area already grappling with high poverty levels raises several troubling questions. It's disheartening to see a continuation of policies that could lead to increased policing in neighborhoods already under stress, especially when the same communities are simultaneously being subjected to an increase in alcohol availability, potentially exacerbating substance abuse issues. We cannot overlook the tragic implications of such measures, which seem contradictory to any claims of caring about genuine community well-being. It sounds very Jim Crow to me. I do not see good things coming from this. I say this with the understanding that the main purpose of Jim Crow laws was to legalize the marginalization of African American people. and these recent decisions remind me of this despairing system we know and experience all too often. The Urbana Police Department's lack of engagement with me and my team at the Well Experience is particularly alarming. As the executive director of an organization dedicated to mental health and family services and serving families in the heart of the community impacted the most, I believe our insights and experiences are vital in shaping meaningful solutions. If community engagement and healing are genuinely the mission, working with organizations on the ground and connecting with the families in this community should be considered a priority. I would like to understand better the Urbana Police Department's definition of, quote, community engagement and the purpose of a proposed community engagement officer. Successful engagement requires relationships with those you choose to engage. Specifically, what kind of training will its members receive in areas such as family engagement, and it'll be on the record.
Thank you. Any other comments? Chandra?
Last week, I got the opportunity to attend Shop with a Cop, what they do every year. It was a lot of fun. The kids really had an awesome time. The parents were so grateful. I was delighted to be able to witness this event and, you know, shop with the kids. I mean, I wish I had unlimited funds too. It was unlimited to them, and you should have saw some of their gets. But no, it was a great opportunity, and I'm grateful for UPD for hosting this event every year. I think it's, you know, a delight for our community, and so I'm glad that they continue to host that every year. So thank you.
Any other comments? Grace or Cherise?
I have. Hello?
Hello, go ahead, Cherise.
Okay. I'm regarding the upcoming agenda item regarding the community engagement. I feel very strongly that we need to keep what we said we were going to do. We said we wanted that kind of engagement with the community. I know that since Chief Boone has been here, he has gone out of his way to find all of the different and engage with the different agencies and so on and so forth to try to assuage some of their fears that they may have regarding the police. I also know that we've lost a lot of officers, and that is going to have an effect, whether anybody believes that or not, on our department's ability to actually respond to different calls that come in. And if you've never been on the other side of a call, meaning if you've called into the police and they show up, that's wonderful. I've been on that other side. And when I'm afraid, that's saying something. And the other side, of course, I happened to not be in Urbana. It wasn't Urbana police. But I've been on the other side where I was afraid somebody was trying to break in, and it took the police 25 minutes to get here. And it's not, that's not a fun feeling at all. I think that some of the issues that take place in the other side, in the other parts of Urbana, Southeast Urbana is a diverse community. It's not just a community of color. Are there a lot of people living in the community that are of color? Yes. But it is not just a community of color, and I don't believe that Chief Boone is trying to over-police a community. I think he wants to. I think his thoughts are that everybody deserves to feel safe in wherever they live, and so nobody should have to wait for the police to come. 25 minutes, a half hour, an hour to show up. No one should have to live that way. If it's something in particularly when it's
Thank you,
something
Sharice.
that is dangerous. So that's the comment that I have to make about that.
Great. Thank you very much, Sharice. Any other comments? Jaya?
Thank you. I do think it's worth having a conversation. There's been a lot of rhetoric recently about the feelings of lack of support for our police department. I think it's a really important conversation that deserves time, attention, and nuance. I think this is an issue that a lot of our community members have really strong feelings on in very different ways. And I think it's important that we think about what does it mean when we create us versus them dynamics. I think it's highly problematic. I think that there are incredible officers, incredible leadership team in our police department that are doing the best they can to serve the city. And there are a lot of community members who are also saying we're interested in exploring other options, and we want to be part of the conversations about what our police department looks like going forward. So I encourage us to think about a more nuanced approach as we think about safety, as we continue to figure out how are we going to examine alternate responses to what public safety means, and that we look at the ways that we have taken significant steps as a council and a community to support the officers that we have. I hear a lot about people saying, well, we never hear good things from the council about our officers. And I think that it's important that we recognize those moments of celebration, the moments where our officers are doing outstanding work more frequently. I think it's also equally and actually more important that we listen to our community members who have questions, who say, I don't understand what's happening. I don't understand why you want this here. We don't want this here. Those voices are important. And so while we examine this vote as we look at what public safety is going to look like for our city going forward, I'm certainly going to continue to be willing to be in conversation with anyone, but ultimately for me, I believe in the org chart of the city of Urbana. The organizational chart of the city of Urbana puts residents of this city above anybody else. And any decisions that I have made or will make on this council are to serve the residents of this city. And sometimes that means saying, I'm sorry, we can't do that. We can't do that right now. Or we need to think about what are all of our options so we can make an informed decision about where we put our limited resources. The city has complex needs, and an important issue like public safety deserves significant dialogue that involves our community in a transparent and participatory manner.
Any other comments? Grace? Did you have something to say?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Okay. I did have James.
Yeah, I have a couple of things I want to say. First of all, in the time between Thanksgiving and the end of the year holidays, I tend to get very reflective on things. And one of the things I do want to mention, Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday of all the ones that we participate in, because it's about gratitude. And I wanted to take a moment to share my gratitude with the staff of the city for all the work they do for our residents, and that's police and fire and all of our every aspect of what we do, whether it's capital plans, road improvement. We have a strong staff of individuals. It may not be as large as some of our colleagues, but it is mighty, and they do a lot of work, and we should take more time to say thanks for that. I think Chandra for mentioning the Shop with a Cop. I mean, that's a recent example of our our employees going out and doing more, but I know a lot of them do more in many different ways. And so thank you for that. I do really appreciate our fire chief bringing his promotions to our council meeting. I think activities like that, which he does on a regular basis, is something we should do more of for all aspects of our city staff that do the work. I will say I'm concerned about the vote tonight about the outreach operation, and you may not have been there the night that we talked about this, but one of the things I was concerned about was the location and how we would decide where it would be located. So I did have some concerns, particularly based on some feedback from that particular area, but we committed to hiring 2 people to do outreach to improve that area of how our police force connects with the community, and we need to do that. I'm willing to talk about location, but I'm not willing to talk about the budget that we agreed to and the staffing that we agreed to. I still believe we do not have enough patrol officers to do what we need to do currently. We may have gotten to that minimal staffing goal that we had looked at for 4 years, but we didn't stay there long, and that completely illustrates why a minimum staffing goal is not a plan for an operation that operates 24 hours a day, 365 days a week. So if we're not going to go through with the budget that we planned from a standpoint of supporting outreach officers, I'm going to start talking about more patrol officers. And so we need to move forward. We'll do that in conjunction with the alternative response model, because that will help too. Thanks.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll move on to unfinished business. There's one item, and this was carried over from the November 25th council meeting, and it's ordinance number 2024-11-036, which is an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance. It's budget amendment number 2. And I don't know, Elizabeth, did you want to refresh folks' memory on what was contained in this budget ordinance? We do have another one on the agenda as well.
I have a point of order question,
Sure.
if you would indulge me for a second. When we addressed this at Committee of the Whole, this question was divided when we voted on it. Both things came forward, but I don't understand why it wouldn't, because it was divided at Committee of the Whole, it wouldn't appear as divided on the City Council agenda. And if there's a reason for that, that's fine, but that's a mystery to me.
So if memory serves me correctly, all that we did at the time that we divided it was to take them one at a time for consideration. We didn't create new ordinances. We didn't create separate items. We just separated them out for individual discussion. Both items still passed to council and then were continued. So it is still the same ordinance. We just took it out to talk about it and vote on it individually, but we didn't create anything new as I understood it.
So just to give a little more nuance to it, the consent agenda was created in these kinds of forums to for things that were like unanimously passed to be able to just be touched one more time before they go forward. I believe when we divided it, the first part, which didn't include this funding for the substation, passed unanimously, and the other part did not. And so they were distinct items. They had different levels of support with the council. I believe that we should address them separated again, but I'm just curious about what the mechanism is to do that.
I do not believe this body has taken an action to create them as separate items. And this is not a consent agenda. This is a single budget amendment, but it is an omnibus. So it does contain a number of items, which does allow us to divide the question, which is a motion that simply allows for consideration of the parts. But it doesn't take away from the fact that this is one budget amendment and its presentation. The city attorney is nodding. If you would like to weigh into this, Matt.
Yeah, I agree. Procedurally, it would simply be another motion to divide the question, articulated as separating out this particular item. You'd vote on each of the motions individually, up or down, essentially. And the motion to divide does not require a second, and it's at the behest of the chair. So.
Can you explain why it didn't remain divided when that's how it was addressed at the committee of the whole?
I'm trusting the clerk's rationale on this. I think it was considered to be for the purpose of discussion last week, but I think your point is well taken also, that for an omnibus or a consent agenda item, which this is not a consent agenda, this is an omnibus item as she described, the purpose of that is for the expediency of items that can have unanimous support, are expected to pass routinely together. This doesn't flow in the same exact spirit of that, so I think there's a case to be made for either approach. But procedurally, you would need to divide it again this evening to consider them separately.
Would you agree that if one part had passed and one part had failed, we wouldn't be considering the whole thing at this point?
That is correct. If one part had failed, only the part that passed would be eligible for consideration.
Yeah, I think this is problematic, but we can deal with it in this meeting.
Elizabeth, do you want to give a summary of what is in this budget amendment?
So the piece of this that has been the subject of the most discussion is, of course, funding related to the community engagement team for basically for office space and one other another small allocation for equipment. I'm just going to be honest here and tell you this was in the budget that was approved by council, but due to a data entry error, both of those things were placed in incorrect line items, and I take responsibility for that. I should have caught it. As you can imagine, it's quite a rush as we get ready to send the budget to council, and I missed it. There are several other items here, $56,100 for fire protection consultation services related to the campus area, some timing changes in various capital improvement funds, also reflecting a decrease in $200,000 in motor fuel tax revenue, and that's related to the tax increases that were ultimately approved by council, which was a little less aggressive schedule than was anticipated in the capital improvement plan, some scheduling changes in the vehicle and equipment replacement fund, an adjustment in the recycling fund, and as you know, that's been discussed, I think, several times now, but related to some significant cost increases for recycling services on the current weekly schedule, and a couple of new grants reflected in the CD grants fund.
I would add the recycling fund item is time sensitive. It needs to be addressed tonight, along with everything else, but that one is actually very time sensitive. Did you have questions for Elizabeth, Chris? Any questions?
I don't have a question for Elizabeth, but I guess my one question I have is there a motion to divide this right now?
There is no motion currently on the floor, and in fact, there needs to be a motion of action before we can divide.
Gotcha.
So I need a motion to approve, get this on the floor for discussion. Chandra.
I'll move approval of ordinance number 2024-11-036, and ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance, budget amendment number 2, omnibus, for approval.
Is there a second?
A second.
Moved by Chandra, seconded by Sharice. Chris?
Thank you. I'd like to divide the question. I would like 10015-155-52930, the office leasing community engagement team, line item, and 1002001-51900, other supplies community engagement team line item. Also 1002001-52930, office leasing, community engagement line item, and 100200201-59300 to also be divided regarding the FERF fund and the community engagement team. All those 4 line items I would like to bundle into one vote, but they be separate from the other budget amendment items.
Do we need a second on that?
There is no second required for dividing the question.
Mary Alice?
I'd like to move a budget, I'd like to amend the budget except for those items since they're now separate, so onto the main one, to include the revised Exhibit A reflecting the additional expenditure for federal grant repayment consistent with the version of the budget amendment number 4. That was at the next one, isn't it?
That would be budget amendment number 4.
We're on number 3.
We're
I
on
got
number
ahead of
2.
us.
We're on number 2.
We're doing 4.
This is budget amendment number 2. Elizabeth?
Just for clarification, since we're dividing the question, there is another line in there related to community engagement team. It's reflected in the vehicle and equipment replacement fund.
I thought I'd said that.
Which number is that?
It's the 4th one.
30049.
The one that's 59300 Police Patrol TRF to VERF Fund.
I'd like, thank you, Elizabeth. I'd like to include that as well.
So at this point, there are 5 items on this list that you're bundling into a separate motion. Okay. We have, go ahead.
I had a question on the items that Chris divided. Is now a time that I can ask staff a question about that?
Sure.
I see that the chief is in the chambers, and I had a question for him. There's been different terminology used for this new proposed space, and I was wanting to hear from your perspective. You've been calling it a community engagement office. Some people have been calling it a substation. In your mind, is there a difference between the intent of the community engagement office versus a police substation? And if you could expand on that.
Sure. I think and I appreciate all the comments and the passion surrounding this. I know how important this is to everybody. And I think I've done a poor job in explaining it so that it's palatable for most. I like to reference it as a community station, and here's why. I think folks envision space with a bunch of policemen, but that's not the vision. And everything I'm telling you, it's based on a vision that I learned back east. We had several substations, satellite stations, community stations. In addition to that, we had several officers that were community relations officers. So just envision this. A location that we identify, or an area of the city that we've identified based on data, okay? Not emotions, just data. And a lot of the issues surrounding that data, I believe with everything in me, crime is driven by poverty and a lack of hope. I said that day one. I have not changed that. I said that the moment I became a leader in the police profession, I say that based on my experiences as a man growing up, this is what I know. But I also know there's a role for police as well. So envision a space where there's community engagement officers in a building that's called a community station. Envision CCRT to address those that are struggling with mental health psychosis, or whatever the case may be, along with the social worker. Envision a bike team that's able to be mobile throughout that community to quickly get to the a crime of a scene, a scene of a crime rather, or a need of a citizen. Envision the clergy patrol. Okay, that's a huge success, folks, and it's growing, working out of that neighborhood as well. Envision 2 community organizations, whether for profit or nonprofit, i.e. DREAM, i.e. Courage Connection, i.e. Silver Water Hearts, whatever the case may be. This is not about over-policing. This is truly from the heart, community policing. It's about awareness, intervention, lastly, enforcement. That's the motto. I do this and I say this from a position, as I said previously, of experience, personally and professionally. This isn't about locking people up or over-policing. This isn't about scaring black folk. I would challenge you all to go to our social media page. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, and they say a whole lot about our engagement with our youth, all our youth, not just black. You know, there's a little kid that greeted me months ago at a elementary school function. I didn't know that kid, but he knew who I was, and he wasn't afraid of me. And he ran up to me, Chief Boone, Chief Boone, Chief Boone, you got any stickers? And that's not just me, that's all our officers. Folks, you have some dynamite people here. But I will say this to you. This generation is different. And Sharice, she hinted to that. They want to be more than just chase bad guys. That was my generation. Older cops, they joined the police department to chase bad guys. This generation want to do that last. And if they're not able to do that, as well as enforce the law, they're going to leave and they're going to vote with their feet, and they've done it. I'm not trying to scare anyone. I'm just telling you what's on the table. So I know I was a bit long-winded. I just wanted to take this opportunity to make sure that I didn't leave anything on the table.
Mary Alice, can you take the chair?
Sure, I'll take the chair. The chair recognizes Diane.
I just wanted to add a couple of comments before we vote on these two parts of this ordinance. First of all, I cannot emphasize enough what this vote is. These are funds that were already approved in the 2025 budget by the council when they voted on the budget in June. We're not increasing the budget. We're not decreasing the budget. These are simply funds that were miscoded. And what hasn't been mentioned yet, and I want to talk about it now, is the message that this sends to employees who you're basically saying you can't make a mistake. And you don't get an opportunity to correct a mistake. And that's what this is. This is simply a transparent mechanism for correcting a mistake so that we properly code funds that are already approved for expenditure, and we comply with the auditing standards and all of that. This is not creating anything new, and it sends a message to employees: you can't make a mistake, and if you do, we're going to take advantage of it. And it makes me very, very sad and troubling. I find it very troubling that this action is being contemplated for this particular item. These funds were already approved in the budget. We simply are trying to fix a mistake in coding. Okay, I'll take the chair back.
All right, I relinquish the
All
chair.
right, I'm going to call for a vote.
I think Jaya has a question.
Yeah, Jaya.
Diane, may I have discussion, please?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I would just like to say on the community engagement space office, or space for an office, that I still have no information on this community engagement program outside of the brief verbal response that was given tonight. And I would like further justification on the use of $75,000 in this fiscal year for an office space for two people to do we don't exactly know what. And these are my same consistent concerns since the budget discussion in June. Nothing has changed on that for me, and we have still not received any information on this program. I think we need to let the community share in the vision by explaining the vision in writing, in a PowerPoint presentation, in a public format where people can understand, share in the vision, and have input. I think the question would be, what if moving this money for just this office space doesn't pass tonight? Then I think the answer from my mind would be that these officers are already funded in the proper accounts. So there are still 2 additional officers dedicated to this role that are approved properly, and they could work on developing the program and present to the council and the public what this program would do, and or also help relieve some of the overtime from patrol in other departments, since that is such an urgent need. As we're having these staffing needs and we're also working on an alternative response, I don't see the reason to expand existing programs. I'd also like to say that before it gets overly simplified into this being a stance just on not supporting the Urbana Police Department, in my mind, that's not the case for me. I'm trying to work towards that change that we have been working on years in the making with studies. A reminder that this council has approved union wage increases, sign-on retention, and other bonuses in tens of thousands of dollars per officer over the past year. We've added in 2020 a digital forensic specialist, intelligence analyst. This past budget, we added an additional deputy chief, training sergeant, these 2 community engagement officers, and continued 1 social worker. I would like to work collaboratively as a community to address the needs and emergency responses in our community. We have been working on this alternative response task force, which again has been years in the making, starting with the community safety study. We need to restructure our emergency response models so that the right people are sent to the right kinds of calls for service, so that our police officers can respond to the calls that they are best equipped to deal with. And we're in the process of figuring that out. And to me, that is the change that we've been working towards. And it doesn't make sense to expand police programs and spending until we have an accurate idea of our future needs. I would be possibly willing to reconsider moving these funds when we have information on the program and the potential impacts on the community, and have had time for community input that's meaningful and collaborative. And I think that's all for now. Thank you.
Jan.
Yeah, I want to thank Chief Boone for providing more information. I think that helps start that better understanding of what is this, right, that Grace was speaking to. I also want to push back on suggesting that voting any particular way is a comment on city staff. I believe that the city council was elected to serve a role, and if we are operating within the responsibilities of our role and voting the way that we believe is appropriate to represent the individuals we've been elected to represent, to me, that is my responsibility. Yes, everyone makes mistakes, but if someone is being consistent in expressing concerns and voting a certain way, that is a council member's responsibility. So I hear that, like, there will be mistakes, but I think it's problematic to suggest that that's taking advantage of. I think, again, this is part of why the city is where it is like anytime there's a disagreement, it's presented as in a combative way. There's no need for that. There's no need to shame or stigmatize a member of council for sticking to the same stance that they have had year over year, month over month. I think just as it's important that we appreciate the hard work that the city staff is doing, I think there needs to be an ability to recognize and appreciate difference of perspectives on council as well, and recognize that there are going to be times where people disagree, but that is also a responsibility that we have all taken on to stand on the principles that we have committed to represent the individuals that we were elected to represent. And voting consistently is not a comment on city staff. It's a comment on what we believe is the best way, at least for myself. Any vote that I take is a representation of how I believe I can best represent the needs of my ward, which is diverse, just like any ward. There are going to be differences of perspectives within any ward, but I think it's problematic to suggest that being consistent is somehow antagonistic to city staff, no matter what department they are in.
Okay, I'm going to call the question on this, and we'll take.
I was going to say something.
I think it's time to vote. So we'll take the main item first, which is everything listed in this budget amendment number 4, except the 5 police-related items.
Budget amendment number 2.
Number 2. Now you've got me saying it. Budget amendment number 2. The motion was by Chandra. It was
Point of order, is there any requirement to hear from all members who would like to speak on an item?
I believe everyone has spoken.
I have not.
Oh, sorry. I thought you had. I lost track.
Okay, thank you, Don. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so a couple things. By the way, the best speech ever that Chief Boone gave about what he has in mind, and I think it's a great vision. The problem is the public who is above me, they're my boss, they don't see it. They don't understand it. They don't believe it. You should read this. I didn't finish this letter, but this is an expert in doing the work that we're trying to do in that poverty, crime-stricken area. And she doesn't understand what this is. And I think what's needed is community buy-in and community and help designing it so that when it does come, because there's in the universe there's more than budget number 2 and 4. There's also budget amendment number 5, and I would be perfectly happy to restore every dime for a good substation if this school was at the ribbon cutting ceremony and the kids were there and the staff was there to do and celebrate the welcoming of a police community, what'd you call it, Chief? Community station. I love this. I love this. This is great. But you did a horrible job, no offense, but you did a horrible job. We were talking about it the other night. November 30th, 2023 at the Salt and Light, totally different thing was described as community engagement. This is so much better. But we need community buy-in because I am not going to send good-intentioned rank-and-file officers to a place they're not wanted, they're not trusted, and they're not accepted. You talk about wanting to quit your job, that would be a work environment I wouldn't want to be in, and nobody would be in, and they don't deserve to be in that. So we're setting them up for failure without community buy-in. And let's take our time, work with the community, do that community engagement, and design this to what they want. This could be a resource, and I think Chief Boone has every good intention of this being a good resource for that community. Let's design it with the community. Thank you.
Okay. At this point, we'll take the vote. This is on the main omnibus bill minus those 5 items. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
No.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin?
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes.
Mayor Marlin?
Yes. By my count, we have 6 yeses and 1 no.
It was
This is
7.
for the remaining of the
It was
budget.
7.
Less the
Yes,
community
because
engagement stuff.
there are 8 that vote. And yes, as a point of order, the item that was just voted on was the original budget item minus the police items that we divided out, which
Would
we,
Mr. Evans like to change his vote?
I would, but can I? Yes, you can. Let me throw a fast yes in there.
We were still determining what the vote counts were because it was listed incorrectly because all 8 people voted and 6 and 1 does not equal.
Correct.
correct, and I did correct the mayor that it was 7 and 1. So that was on the audible record that it was 7 in the affirmative, 1 in the negative, but Councilmember Evans wishes for his vote to be recorded with the affirmative making the total 8 for passage for the budget amendment minus the police items.
So the total
Thank
is
you.
8 out of 8 possible votes. All right. The next vote is for the 5 items related to the community engagement team in the community station. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Wait. Are we voting, is a yes voting for the community engagement or against it?
The motion on the floor, moved by Councilmember Bishop, seconded by Councilmember Hersey, is to approve the 5 police items that were in the original budget amendment. That is the motion on the floor for the vote.
So a yes vote is for the community engagement station. Go ahead. Call the roll.
Councilmember Wu?
Yes.
Councilmember Evans?
No.
Councilmember Hersey?
Yes.
Councilmember Colasetti?
No.
Councilmember Bishop?
Yes.
Councilmember Wilkin?
No.
Councilmember Quisenberry?
Yes.
Mayor Marlin?
Yes. This is a budget amendment, so it requires 6 of 8 elected officials to pass. We have 5 yes votes, so this motion fails. All right, we'll move on to Committee of the Whole. Report from Jaya.
On behalf of the Committee of the Whole, I'd like to move the following items as part of the consent agenda. Resolution number 2024-12-08R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement for the design and construction of improvements to Wright Street between the City of Champaign and the City of Urbana. Resolution number 2024-12-08R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an Urbana Home Consortium subrecipient agreement regarding the use of home funds on behalf of the City of Champaign, Illinois, Park Glen Phase 2, fiscal year 2024 to 2025. Resolution number 2024-12-083R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an Urbana Home Consortium rental housing development agreement, Woda Cooper Companies, Inc., FY 2024-2025. Resolution number 2024-12-084R, a resolution approving and increasing the number of liquor licenses in the Class P designation for Satara Gas, Inc., doing business as Satara Gas, Inc., 1821 South Philo Road. And resolution number 2024-12-085R, a resolution approving an increase in the number of liquor licenses in the Class P designation for H Mart Urbana LLC, doing business as H Mart 220 North Broadway Avenue.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved by Jaya, seconded by Mary Alice. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin?
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes.
That motion passes.
On the regular agenda, we have 3 items. The first one, on behalf of the Committee of the Whole, I'd like to move resolution number 2024-12-081R, a resolution to endorse the Champaign-Urbana Urban Area Transportation Study, CUATS, Long Range Transportation Plan, LRTP 2050.
Is there a second?
Second.
Go for it, Sharice.
Moved by Jaya, seconded by Sharice. Any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin?
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes.
That motion passes.
Next, I'd like to move on behalf of the Committee of the Whole, ordinance number 2024-12-038, an ordinance amending the Urbana City Code, Chapter 14, Section 14-7, and Chapter 22, Section 22-102, food licenses and recycling tax.
Is there a second?
Second. Grace.
Moved by Jaya, seconded by Grace. Will The clerk, please call the roll.
I had
Oh, I'm sorry, any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Oh, I'm sorry, Diane. I did have discussion. I wasn't sure if you were recognizing me.
Grace, can you repeat that, please? Did you want to say something?
I did have discussion. Yes, please.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I support continuing recycling on that weekly basis and think that's a really important thing for our values. I do have concerns about this recycling tax fee increase being set so many years in the future. I do understand the rationale that it's to be able to continue our contract period, but I certainly hope that we can find some other options and hopefully reduce some of those fees before we get to those future years with some creative solutions.
Any other discussion? Mary Alice.
I just wanted to let people know that I think I was the lone voice who disagreed with the weekly recycling. I think it should be bi-monthly. So won't be voting for this, but I'm sure it'll pass because I was the only vote before.
I think you mean bi-weekly.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Same outcome, but.
Bi-weekly, bi-monthly, it's, yeah.
Okay. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
No.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
No.
Ms. Colasetti?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin?
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes.
That motion passes.
And finally, on behalf of the Committee of the Whole, I'd like to move ordinance number 2024-12-039, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance budget amendment number 4 omnibus.
I'll second.
Moved by Jaya, seconded by James. I will add to this before we ask Tim Cowan to make a comment that this ordinance did pass out of committee last week. After the meeting last week, we were notified by the Federal Highway Administration and Illinois Department of Transportation that we did need to pay back $512,000 related to the Windsor Road case. And so Tim sent a memo around this week explaining what happened, and we have included a revised budget amendment that includes that amount of money. But I'll ask Tim to take it from here. Probably said too much, but it's been a long and winding road on this one.
Good evening, Council. As you all know, I shared a memo with you middle of last week once we were informed by FHWA. Just a quick debrief on the happenings here is Windsor Road project, constructed nearly a decade ago, had some issues with construction that the city and the contractor at the time, Stark Excavating, had been working through for a while collaboratively and then not so collaboratively. Went through litigation. Litigation awarded long-term dollars for long-term maintenance of that roadway to reach the intended design life of 45 years. Other things that weren't awarded to the city were our legal fees for that fight, as well as the contractual obligation with the IDOT and the federal government that had partnered with the city on constructing that roadway. Based on what their findings were, is because the roadway was not constructed per contract, which is what the city went to fight with Stark about through litigation. The contract between us and the federal government still requires repayment of a portion of their funds for that construction that did not meet the standard specifications. The total of which $512,537, even dollar number, is what they're looking to recoup. With repaying this, the council took action recently to kind of create a bridge loan for us through other funds to continue things that were ongoing, but at this time, IDOT's not authorizing additional expenditures of our state motor fuel tax fund. So until we repay this, they won't authorize additional funds via change order for ongoing work or new contracts, which we have in the queue for this fiscal year. At this time, we talked about it internally, and the decision was made to get the repayment, to recommend a repayment of these funds to IDOT and the federal government so that they'll lift. We can coordinate lifting their withhold on additional authorizations of state motor fuel tax dollars. I think that's the bulk of it, and I'll take questions if there's
Chris.
any.
I'm going to ask the Mary Alice Wu question. So when we spend $512,000 on this, what don't we get to do?
Well, right now in the CIP, that money is earmarked for Windsor Road long-term maintenance.
Oh, okay.
So probably a portion of the long-term maintenance is not going to be done. We're going to review that with the upcoming CIP to see exactly what that is. I know the big dollar item of the $2.8 million that was awarded was an overlay in the next 5 years sometime. And then another subsequent preventative maintenance programs at a increased rate and potentially other rehabilitation to get us to the 45 years. So we'll probably have to take a harder look at that and see what the compromise is.
Any other questions for Tim?
I have a question. How come IDOT didn't just go after those people like we did?
So the structure of this was one that at the time of this project, the road was deteriorating extremely rapidly. And in order to expedite the design and construction, the city opted to basically run the project locally rather than having the state run it, because the state was going to, in their queue, it was going to take another year before they would be able to get that project to design, letting, construction. So because we locally led it, IDOT and FHWA did not participate in any of the legal struggles we had with the contractor. They essentially said, we don't have any teeth in this. We don't have a contract with them. We have a contract with you. And so they did not offer assistance during that time.
Any other questions?
And I also have a question.
Go ahead, Grace.
Thank you. Could someone clarify if this is in the published budget amendment in the packet? I'm not seeing anything for 500-some thousand for Windsor Road in the published packet.
It's included in Exhibit A revised. It was attached to the memo that was in tonight's packet.
Mayor?
Yeah.
I'm not sure it was in the
Seeing
public
it on the
packet.
one that's online.
That was provided to the council.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was sent to council. Sorry. Again, this all happened this week. This is time sensitive. For us to get these funds unfrozen, we need to take action.
I guess my question is just procedurally if that's okay, since this wasn't in the published packet.
Yes.
So our obligation to the public in terms of publication is just the agenda. We have to advertise an agenda that notices the business of the city sufficient that the public can be reasonably informed about what decisions this body will be making. The providing of the public packet, while is our tradition, is us attempting to further inform and explain what actions this body takes. I apologize if there was any mismatch between the council packet and the private packet, but I do believe that the discussion of this body, and as long as the budget amendment itself has correct numbers, or we correctly state the numbers as part of the motion to adopt on the floor, that we are fully compliant, given that we advertised the agenda in a timely manner with the Open Meetings Act, and it is a budget amendment detailing what is before you.
Thank you. So it sounds like we need an amendment to add that officially to the budget amendment that's in the packet. Is that
I would actually say that you could just do it in the motion. You could do a friendly amendment to the motion on the floor and just include the language with the appropriate values rather than amending.
Can I make a friendly amendment
You may.
then? All right. I'd like to make a friendly amendment for this budget amendment number 4 to include the revised Exhibit A, which reflected the additional expenditure for federal grant repayment consistent with the version of budget amendment number 4 provided in the updated council email. It wasn't an agenda packet.
You need a second?
Second.
Okay. Is that acceptable?
Who
So I would-
seconded the original?
I would actually ask, because the original motion on the floor is by Councilmember Colasetti, seconded by Councilmember Quisenberry. So if you both are amenable to that friendly amendment and can give a verbal confirmation of acceptance on the record?
I'm amenable to that.
I am too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Friendly amendment accepted. So the vote will be on the ordinance 2024-12-039, which is budget amendment number 4 as amended. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin?
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes.
Mayor Marlin?
Yes, that passes, and this marks the end of the Windsor Road battle. Maybe 14. I feel like we should have a moment of silence. Anyway. We'll move on to, thank you, Jaya. We'll move on to reports of special committees. There are none. Reports of officers.
Could I just make a quick reminder while Braden and Nick are taking their place at the table? There's a Lincoln Avenue corridor study which was presented to council a couple weeks ago, and the comment period extends through January 3rd, 2025. And if you want to take a look at it, it's at ccrpc.org, and it's one of the recent items that will pop up on their website.
I had a couple of quick items of information. First of all, the partial special census process is wrapping up this week. Despite our best efforts to get any information out of the census folks, they have not given an indication of what kind of results they're seeing, except that we should see something within 90 days. So we should have the new census numbers within 90 days. So look for something mid-March, if all goes well. Secondly, you may have read that the Illinois American Water Company was awarded some rate increase. We had intervened in that case. The media reports gave some information, including the fact that the ICC granted a 27.5% rate increase. But there were some other items or other parts of that we actually, due to our intervention, prevailed on. So I just wanted to let you know what those were. One is that one of the major requests of the water company was to reallocate regional sewage treatment costs, wastewater treatment costs to local ratepayers. So basically it would effectively have made us pay twice. Once our regular bill to the Urbana-Champaign Sanitary District, plus we were going to be charged for wastewater treatment in other communities that the water company served. The Illinois Commerce Commission rejected that request. That was the second time that request has come. They asked for it 2 years ago. Probably won't be the last, but it was rejected. Secondly, the water company had requested that water customers fund $5.8 million of an incentive compensation program for company executives who met the company's goals. That was rejected as well. They had sought a 2-step rate increase over the next 2 years. That was rejected. They sought to pass on the costs of compliance with new environmental regulations to the ratepayers. That was rejected. And ICC did approve the expansion of the discount for low-income customers who are at or below 150% of the federal poverty level, and that's effective July 1st, 2025. In total, Illinois American Water received $195 million in rate increases in the past 2 years, according to the Citizens Utility Board. So our intervention actually made a big difference in the outcome of this case, and there will be a rate increase. Individual water customers using 5,000 gallons a month will see an increase in their bill from $76 a month to about $97 a month. And this again reflects the trend of private water companies now having the ability to buy up public water systems, which is what's happening in the state of Illinois, and spreading the cost over all the existing customers. So that was good news on that front. The last thing is staff have completed a draft of the alternative response RFP and circulating internally, and then we'll be circulating it to council for your comments so we can get that going. Thank you. All right, reports of the officers who will be talking about social service funding and youth services grant. Braden and Nick, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. As the mayor said, Nick and myself will be providing a presentation on youth services funding in the city of Urbana. So our presentation tonight will do two things. So first, Nick is going to provide an overview of prior year accomplishments of the youth services grant program for fiscal year 2024, which was last year. And then the second part of the presentation, we will be bringing to you recommendations for how to use the additional social service funds that council committed back with the 2025 budget, as well as some additional ARPA funding that we are looking to redirect toward social services. So that's kind of the roadmap of where we'll go tonight. So I'll pass it over to Nick.
Thanks, Braden. Good evening. So as Braden said, I'm going to give a quick overview of the last program year's accomplishments for the youth services program. For anyone who's listening who isn't familiar with the youth service program, this is a grant opportunity that the city's had for the last several years that provides funding to organizations throughout the community that are providing services in a number of eligible categories to youth, and that ranges from early childhood through age of 22 throughout the Urbana community. So in the previous program year, which again, for anyone listening who isn't familiar, this would have been the year that started in July 1st of 2023 and went through June 30th of this year. The funding that we had to work with for this program was $200,000 through a violence prevention grant through the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, $75,000 in city general funds, and then $25,000 in community development block grant funds through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This outlook has changed for our current program year, and looking forward, and Braden will talk more about that in a bit. So in the past program year, we provided funding to, or awarded funding to 17 programs operated by 13 different organizations throughout the Urbana community. And then just to note, 2 of these programs have asterisks on them on the screen. Those were programs that, due to some unforeseen capacity issues, ended up not drawing down funds. So overall, it ended up being 15 programs that actually ended up being funded through the Youth Services Grant. Unfortunately, we don't have time this evening to go through all the great work that each one of these organizations is doing, but just to provide a quick overview of some of the services that these organizations are providing. Here we have a chart showing all the eligible service categories. This is based on the services that organizations say they're providing when they apply for funding. One organization can fall into multiple eligible service categories. So from this chart, you can see most organizations fall under violence prevention or education, which makes sense for a youth services grant. And then there are a handful of organizations providing more specialized services and things like healthcare or job training. This does represent all the eligible service categories for the grant, so there are at least some grantees in each of those categories. And then next we'll run through some numbers for the youth that these programs were able to reach. So here we have a chart. This is broken up by quarter, showing how many youth were being reached by these programs in any given quarter. The reason we're presenting it quarterly, we realized putting this this report together, and we have a pretty good sense in any given quarter how many youth are being served. But we realized just based on the way we were receiving data, we didn't necessarily know who was being newly served from quarter to quarter, which makes aggregating things a bit tricky. We have incorporated some changes into our reporting this year that'll make doing things like that a bit easier. But just from this, you can see it does fluctuate a bit from quarter to quarter. Certain programs are operating at different times of year. But basically in any given quarter, our programs were serving several hundred youth throughout the community. And then finally, just a note on this, there was one organization that we pulled out of this. That was the Public Health District's Farm to School program. They were giving us some pretty big accomplishment numbers, which is awesome. They operate pretty embedded within the Urbana School District. So, you know, their accomplishment numbers are often like reflective of the populations of several schools. So it tended to swallow up whatever we put it with. So shout out to them, but it's just some context on why we pulled that out. Next, we'll run through some demographic information for the youth that were being served through these programs. Again, this is just presented with the caveat that most organizations have some kind of formal client intake process where they're able to collect some demographic information and then report that to us. There are some organizations that operate more open door assembly style programming, and they aren't able to provide us that data. So this is just presented with the qualification that if organizations could collect it, that's what's been presented. So here you can see 51% of youth being served through these programs are Black or African American youth, 14% Hispanic or Latino. So our programs are doing a pretty good job of reaching minority populations in the community. And then from here, we have some data on household income of clients being served through these programs, where you can see most youth being served through these programs are low, very low, or extremely low income. So those three would be anything below 60% of the median family income. And then pretty even distribution as far as gender identity of youth being served. So that was a very quick run through. We're happy to answer any questions. Hopefully you can see these programs are having a big impact, both in terms of number of youth they're serving, as well as reaching target populations. That said, you know, this is still a pretty young program, so we want to keep thinking about ways we can strengthen data collection. I already mentioned some ways we've been doing that. But we also want to be thinking about, you know, other metrics that we can be using to track grantee success. On that note, most organizations were very successful in terms of drawing down all their awarded funds. I did mention a couple cases where programs ended up not getting off the ground. We try to screen for capacity as much as possible when we're reviewing applications. That said, we know things do come up, so we just want to keep thinking about ways that we can be prepared to walk organizations through those circumstances when things do come up and make sure these funds are getting out into the community and having the maximum impact that they can. So with that, I'll hand it over to Braden.
And one thing I'll add about the Youth Services Grant Program. So we've run this specific grant program since 2021, so it's been a couple years. And during that time, I think we've seen a really good mix of, organizations that come back for funding, and we've been able to build some kind of consistent funding relationships with organizations, which is very important for them to be able to operate, and to keep their services going. But we've seen a good mix of those kind of reoccurring funding agreements with new organizations that are getting off the ground. We've had some smaller nonprofits come to us and receive funding. And so, again, I think we've had a good mix of newer organizations that kind of want to get their first grant, haven't had a grant before, and we do our best, like Nick alluded to provide that support for them. But then, again, balancing that with some larger organizations that do really great work and have been around for a while, and we're happy to support them as well. So thank you, Nick, for that. So now we'll move into kind of our recommendations moving forward. I'll do a little bit of a history lesson here, since June feels like a long time ago. So in the FY25 budget, Council increased recurring social service funding for the Youth Services Grant to $300,000 in City General Fund. So again, the idea was we would fund the Youth Services Grant Program at $300,000 recurring just again to keep that funding consistent, as Nick showed on that slide. In 2024, we had several different grant programs that we kind of cobbled together funding, which we're always happy to do that, and we're always looking for new grant opportunities to help in support our programs. But council made the decision to just increase the recurring funding to $300,000 for the Youth Services Grant Program. Council also provided on top of that an additional $400,000 in one-time funding to address social service needs. And at the time, that discussion was a little broad in terms of what social service means. But again, $400,000 was set aside in one-time funding for FY25 for social services. There's also been discussion of moving some uncommitted ARPA funds to social services. Again, the ARPA funds have a deadline, and so the thought was to help get some of that funding expended, could we move it to social service programming? So again, just to summarize, there's essentially $700,000 in one-time funding when you combine ARPA and general fund together, currently committed to social services. And again, this does not include that $300,000 recurring that council set aside for Youth Services Grant Program. So really the purpose of this part of the presentation is to just bring a recommendation to council for discussion so that staff can have direction on the most effective way to utilize this one-time funding in a manner that is timely and also responsive to community needs. So just some considerations that staff are working under. The first, again, is that ARPA deadline, which I believe is December 2026. So it's coming up quickly. Again, there's some ARPA eligibility categories which we need to be mindful of as we think of ways to commit this funding. But also, again, just what are the community needs that we are seeing, and how can the funds be utilized to address those needs? And also staff capacity. How can we design programs or come up with a solution that meets community needs but is also conscientious of staff time and staff capacity. So again, those are just some of the considerations that we are working under. So our recommendation is kind of two parts to it. So the first is that we're recommending that the Youth Services Grant Program stays at that $300,000 annual level. So again, that has been set aside recurring for the Youth Services Grant Program. We feel as if that's an appropriate amount of funding at this time for the based on what we've seen in terms of the applications we've been receiving and what the need is. Youth services is a big need in the community, but it is just one of many needs that we are seeing. So we feel as though that $300,000 pot of funding goes a long way to meet that need. So in terms of that other $700,000 in one-time funding, staff are recommending to commit that funding to a round 2 of the Housing and Homeless Innovations Grant Program. Now, again, to continue the history lesson, 2022 feels like a much longer time ago, but in 2022, the Community Development Department launched what we called the Housing and Homeless Innovations Grant Program. So some of you might remember this. Originally, we were using funds that came through the Home ARP program. They were HUD funds. They were in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the purpose of using those funds, the Housing and Homeless Innovations Grant Program provided grant funding to nonprofits for services and housing and shelter, specifically for individuals and families that were experiencing homelessness. So these were some, again, this was back in 2022, some of the original grantees from the Housing and Homeless Innovations Grant Program include many familiar agencies, Cunningham Township, See You at Home, Champaign County Healthcare Consumers, RPC, Housing Authority, and Strides all received funding through this initial round of the Housing and Homeless Innovations Grant Program. The eligible categories under this program were housing navigation, supportive services, wraparound services, rental assistance, transitional housing, but also non-congregate shelter development and operating and capacity building support for organizations. So pretty broad eligibility in terms of the types of projects that were funded through this program. So when we were thinking through, possibly issuing a round 2 of the Housing and Homeless Innovations Grant Program, again, we were thinking about what those community needs are. And During the township board meeting, Supervisor Chenoweth did a great job of speaking to that ongoing need that we're seeing in terms of homelessness in Champaign County. We also pulled some numbers. These were year over year from the point in time count that's conducted every January. You can see those numbers increasing incrementally every year. So again, we know it's a persistent need, and we know it's a need that has been growing in our community. We also hear regularly from nonprofit organizations across the community that we work with, just reporting on just that they're operating at or near capacity, or over capacity. That happens as well. So we have received feedback. We've heard from many agencies actually saying, "Hey, are you going to issue another round of the Housing and Homeless Innovations Grant Program?" That is a comment that we've actually received many times. So that's something that went into this recommendation as well. So. We're proposing this to you as an option. This would be staff's recommendation, just to kind of break down what the funding for a round 2 of the Housing and Homeless Innovations Grant Program would be. Again, we take that $400,000 in one-time city general fund, the $300,000 approximately in uncommitted ARPA. We do have some remaining home ARP funds. We have about $500,000 remaining that we could potentially include in this total pot, which would bring a total of up to $1.2 million could be made available if we were to do a round 2 of the Housing and Homeless Innovations Grant Program. So again, we think that could make a big impact in the community in terms of funding local organizations that are doing a lot of really important work in this community. So that's our recommendation. We want to get your thoughts and feedback on that. One thing we haven't really discussed is timeline. If this is something council would want staff to move forward to, we would need to, luckily we have a lot of the infrastructure from the original round of Housing and Homeless Innovations grant funding. We have the grant portal that we used. We would just need to update it so we could get it off the ground pretty quickly if council were to approve of this direction. So again, it would be a pretty easy lift, all things considered, which was one of the reasons that we were recommending it in terms of just staff capacity and what we would need to do to get this off the ground. So that's another consideration, but we're happy to open it up for discussion and any questions or comments.
I'd suggest starting with questions. Mary Alice?
I will start with a question then. So I know that in the first round of, is it called HHI? Is that right? That there was a partnership, there was a whole group of people who worked together to kind of form one big bucket, right? I think the city of Champaign was involved and other entities. Is that discussion going on for this round 2?
Potentially. So the round 1, the city of Champaign threw in some city general fund as well. So they had we were attempting to just bring together as many pots of funding so that it would be easier for organizations who wanted to apply. They wouldn't have to look, okay, we didn't want to issue 10 different grant programs. So instead we brought, all of those funding sources together. The home ARP funds we do share with Champaign. Right. So if, we want to include that $500,000 in home ARP funding, Champaign would be at the table. Obviously, if it's City of Urbana, ARPA, or City General Funds, that would just be the City of Urbana making those decisions. But there is potential for that collaboration if we decide we want to include home ARP funding in it.
And then my second question, I'll certainly pass it to my colleagues. For the uncommitted ARPA funds, the $300,000, I thought that had to be committed by the end of this year. Is that wrong? That's correct. Okay, so that gives us 3 weeks to correct, right?
Yes, it has to be committed, but one of the ways you can commit funds is through an interdepartment memorandum of understanding. So if council wanted to move forward this idea, the executive department and grants management would have an MOU, and that would count from an ARPA standpoint of being obligated by the deadline.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
You have to be spent by the end of December 26th. James.
Yeah, a couple of things. I was going to ask that question because confirming the dates, it's encumbered by the end of this month and spent by the end of a year from now.
2 years.
2 years, 26, okay. And everybody realizes we don't have another council meeting before the end of this year, right? We have one committee of the whole meeting, and the council meeting got postponed to January.
Correct.
So the council can't take an actual action on this. It'll only be on the basis of a straw poll, either tonight or at the committee of the whole meeting next week. Everybody understands that, right? Okay. That, we need to make sure, right? Because we can't, if we do this wrong, we lose $300,000. We have to give it back. I'd like us to be sure. It's unfortunate, I know the time of year and all that, but if we could do a special meeting after next week's committee of the whole meeting for that purpose, I'd be down for that, right? I do think this makes sense. So if it's 1.2 million, other entities might be involved? Is that what I'm hearing with the home ARP funds?
So the home ARP funds, we have until 2030, so our deadline is not as dire. We're in an ongoing conversation about whether we're going to include those with, because that would need to be a collaboration with Champaign. It's a possibility, and if we did, that would bring us up to that $1.2 million. So that is one of the options. But if we were to move forward with what City of Urbana's portion of it, that would be the $400,000 general fund, and then the $300,000 ARPA. So it would be anywhere between $700,000 to $1.2 million, depending on whether we decide we want to include that home ARP funding in it.
Okay, but then what? If we did this round, would the timeline be that this round needs to be spent in 2 years?
We would.
Or would it be, we do this typically like on a yearly basis, right? Not on a multi-year basis, but with the funds, if we're using, I don't know, since we're mixing general funds and the uncommitted ARPA funds, can we really do it over 2 years? What I'm getting at is I'm worried about the amount and whether we can swing it in a year. I'd be worried if we could swing spending all of this appropriately, effectively in a year. If we can do it over 2 years, that makes it a little bit more reasonable. Sounded like if it's home ARP involved, it could take up to 5 years.
So you're correct, and something that staff would do, again, our mindset is trying to make it so that the grantee doesn't have to think, the agency doesn't have to think through, what my deadline is. We would work to pair the most appropriate source of funding based on what the project is, right? So if someone is going to build something that's going to be done in 2 months, we'd say, oh, this is maybe the better source of funding for that. So there's a little bit of, and that was how the first round of HHI worked as well. We did some work to kind of see, okay, this project is better for this pot of money, and we can make that determination so that the grantee doesn't have to really think through, which should I apply for. We can help them with that. The other thing is that, in the past, if we have a funding agreement with a source of funding, if we have a contract and we need to execute a contract amendment or an extension, we can do that as well, so that they can expend the full amount of money if they're not able to meet the deadline.
Okay, and then one last comment. I'm going to give you permission to use a term other than incrementally for the point in time. Since it's going up, it's doubled in 2 years. That's not incrementally. That's going crazy. So thank you. That's what I had.
Any other questions? Chris?
So how do we, so tonight we're kind of try to commit to this breakdown of funding. Is that what you would like to ask to do, preferably?
Yes.
Okay. How do we then process the type, not the organization, but the type of funding we want to do?
I don't know if I understand.
There's the funding to the specific organization, but then you gave us a menu of those guys, eligible program, I'm assuming those are just type of programs, right? Or those have an organization behind all those?
Those are just the eligible types of services
That's
that
what I'm
could be
saying.
funded. Yes.
Right.
Right.
So
So
how do we commit to any of these?
So what we're saying is if we were to issue a round 2 of the HHI, we would reopen that original portal that we used. We would use kind of the same materials, which would state that agencies that supply any of these types of services would be eligible to apply for funding. So we're not saying we want one organization to do housing navigation, we want one to do, we're saying what are your programs that you need funding for? You submit an application, and then, you know, if the funding is appropriate and available, then, you know, they can be eligible to receive funding. We're not picking and choosing which ones we're looking for. We're saying all of these would be eligible under the grant program to be funded.
And we is not the city council, it's a committee, right?
If council did not want us to fund some of these, you could give us that direction for sure.
Go ahead. Mary Alice seems to know this.
I guess let me see if I can recast this a little bit. These are the categories that City Council would say we would like to fund. Any organization that falls into this would put in a grant proposal and say, I do non-congregate shelter development and supportive services. Okay, so it would check which category it fell in. And then the group that reviews it would say, okay, this makes sense, but we don't say we're going to spend $100,000 on housing navigation. Right. We're going to spend $50,000 on supportive services. It's all of it together, if that makes sense. Yeah. But I think Braden's question was, is there something here that we don't think belongs on the list? Is that right?
I see these as kind of like the goals of the program. So, for example, our youth services grant program, we say the goals are violence prevention, workforce development, education, right? So those are the broad goals that, you know, if your program fits within one of those categories, you can apply for funding. So again, these are kind of those guiding eligible categories, but also guiding goals in terms of what we are looking for in applications. So when we solicit applications, we say, hey, if you do housing navigation, if you have a rental assistance program, if you do this or that, you can apply for this funding. We're not budgeting based on these categories, as Councilmember Wu stated. We're just saying these are what are eligible if you'd like to apply for funding.
To the organization.
Exactly, yep.
Chandra.
Could you sort of explain what operating capacity building support means or looks like for a program?
Yeah, so operating would be ongoing payroll, things like that, the lease of your office space, just kind of general day-to-day business operations. Capacity building is adding staff, investments that help you expand what you're able to offer. So again, that category is to try to just say that if you have, you know, staffing concerns, and, you know, if you were to have more staff, you could address these needs better, that kind of thing.
And at least with home ARP, I would add HUD requires operating to be paired with another eligible service category, kind of like how with our CHOTO agreements with Habitat, we often award operating in addition to development funds.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I like that idea, because I would think like with this sort of one-time funding, supporting operating or staffing could be sort of tricky if we're talking or looking at sustainability of a program too. So, I mean, I would think that if someone were to choose that area, they would need to choose another one as well, like you said.
Yes, and that's how we designed it the first round, is that, you know, if you were providing rental assistance, you know, direct service to renters, but you also needed, you know, to pay the staff time for the staff who was administrating that program, you could kind of pair that together. Okay. In that way.
Okay, and then additionally, I have one other question. The way back when you were speaking about the programs that didn't get stood up, what happened to those funds? Did they just get put back into the pot to be reallocated?
Yes,
Okay.
that is what happened. So there were two, Business Elevator and the Refugee Center, weren't able to stand up their programs in the time that was required.
So are those funds reallocated amongst the in FY24, or are they?
No, so I
in
believe
FY25?
I believe both of those were funded through that DCEO grant.
Okay.
So it just went back into the budget line item, which we can then use for violence prevention programming.
Gotcha. Okay,
generally.
thank you. Oh, just generally overall, I'm for the HHI
Yes.
plan.
Yeah.
So.
Grace or Sharice, did you have questions?
I don't have any questions right now.
Yes, thank you. I have two questions. I'm not sure if this was what Chandra was asking or separate. I'm sorry if it's a repeat. But I was wondering why there's that $500,000 of unspent HHI money from round one. Are those the canceled projects, or was that youth service grants you were talking about?
So the 500,000 from the first round, that was the home ARP funding that we didn't commit. It wasn't canceled projects. It was just that we didn't get. We had a total amount available, and then we didn't get applications that we could fully commit the funds. So it was essentially a balance that was left over after the grant competition closed. And again, since we have until 2030, our thought was we'll kind of retool and see how we can use those funds. But we didn't have any canceled projects through home ARP. We were able to fund everything fully.
And so I guess a sub-question to that, then it sounds like you would expect that there would be projects that would apply for a second round, that we've already heard interest. Was this the first round, and maybe it takes a while for people to spread the word?
Yeah, I personally do think we would be able to commit and spend these funds relatively quickly. Again, as I alluded to when I was talking about community need, we've heard a lot. We get calls and emails from organizations that say, I got this great program, do you have any grant funds? And we always say, we'll let you know if we do. And also as Councilmember Quisenberry pointed out, the need is growing rapidly. So I think we would be able to commit and expend these funds certainly within the timeline. I think 1.2 million sounds like a lot, but it's a drop in the bucket in terms of what these organizations are doing in our community and kind of what the need is.
Thank you. And then my second question was if we could clarify if we've already satisfied the ARPA requirement for our money. My understanding was we had satisfied that by allocating that remaining $300,000 to social services in the grants management division already, and this is further clarifying that. Could we have clarification on satisfying that ARPA allocation requirement?
The direction at the last ARPA discussion was to put this in the $300,000 into social service funding. The official mechanism from the Treasury standpoint that counts as an obligation is that interdepartmental memorandum of understanding. We did not write that yet. Just there's a level of clarity that you're supposed to provide in that memorandum. So just general social service funding is probably a little bit broad. So that's why we wanted to at least try to narrow it down a little bit before we put pen to paper on that. So partially yes, but not officially so.
Thank you.
Mary Alice?
I'd like to throw a little wrench in some of this discussion. I'm going to move on to discussion if that's okay. Sure. Doing an HHI round 2 with the uncommitted ARPA and the uncommitted home ARP seems like a good idea. I'm behind that. I'm a little hesitant about the city general funds that we set aside, and this is why. And Chandra and I have had this conversation before with the youth services grant. It would be nice, when I first started on council, it was broader, right? So the social service grant was consolidated with township and with the city, and we had youth services, and we had workforce development, and we had homeless services. We had this really big, broad thing. We had a lot more money too. But what I was thinking about when we allocated additional funds was to be able to reincorporate some of that adult services, so to speak. So I would advocate for taking at least some of the $400,000 adding it to the social services with additional categories for workforce development, some kind of adult supportive services. The ones that I can think of that we funded, there were a couple of things that I thought was kind of interesting. We actually funded Meals on Wheels, and so we gave Urbana residents discounts, and we paid like $3 per person, and we said, okay, we're going to pay up to $10,000 so that people who are eligible for Meals on Wheels have a reduced rate. I thought that was a good program. It was very easy to keep track of. Another one that we did was we helped with transportation for people who need to get to medical appointments. So I thought that was also another good. These are just examples. I don't know if these same groups would apply, but I do think that we should use at least some of the city general funds for those types of categories.
Thank you. To piggyback on what Mary Alice was saying, Braden, I guess I just wish we could, like especially with the money that we set aside, the $400,000 in the general fund, like we could. And I've done this with you. I've sent you an email of a whole grocery list of proposals to use money. And how do I get that to a vote? Or if I vote for this breakdown tonight, the money goes to some committee that's going to be, is it gone and I have no choice over it? Because I'm kind of gleaning where Mary Alice is can we, make some choices to spend some of this money?
Absolutely. And any grant agreement would have to be approved by City Council as well. So, you would be making those funding decisions as well. But certainly this is the council's direction.
I'm talking within the context of 7 votes here. I'm not saying I want to spend it myself. So, so should we shoot emails of ideas to you to help you kind of, here's what council's categories are, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think that, and I've certainly, I appreciate the things that council sends me, and I research all of that. The purpose of this conversation was to kind of hopefully get a consensus in terms of direction for staff. But absolutely any sort of recommendation, or if you hear of programs in the community that are doing great things that you think we should be involved in, absolutely let us know. You all help us kind of know what's going on out there in your neighborhoods. So that's very helpful for sure.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for all your work on this. I do have a capacity question, right? It's December. The $400,000 is for this fiscal year. What is the feasibility of finding another mechanism for distributing those funds if it's not included in this HHI opportunity?
That would be a concern. Again, the reason that the thought process of the HHI round 2 was because, again, it would just mean reopening that portal, doing some kind of minimal editing, make sure the years are changed. But we felt like that would be a pretty easy lift. Designing a new grant program always takes time, and you kind of want to make sure you're targeting the right things, and so that can be a little challenging. It's not to say it's impossible. It's just under the constraints of the time, that was our concern. We realize there are a lot of other great programs, and we want to be able to fund every kind of need in the community, but just under the constraints of the time and what it would take for staff to kind of get it over the finish line. Our idea was that this was the easiest lift, and that was our main reason for putting this proposal together.
That's kind of why I ask, right? Because you're 2 people, right? And I agree,
There's
Mary.
one more of us. We have 3
Yay,
now.
3 people. That's progress. I agree with Mary Alice. It was incredible when it was a more diverse range that we could fund when it was with Township too. And I think figuring out, for the next council, sorry, I got a buzzy mic. What does it look like to move back towards something like that? I think there's value in that. But again, it's December, right? And so by the time this actually rolls out, I'm just concerned because I'm thinking about, I know the grants team is really good about, if an award is given, well, we're going to use the funding that's for FY25 first, again, not putting that on the grantee, but putting it on the city to say, okay, we paid for this with this money first, and now we're going to move on to this money. So I will also say this is such a need, right? Like I know you guys are getting those calls all the time. We heard from the township supervisor earlier today. And I think the categories are wide enough that to me, this feels actionable, and I think the amount is meaningful. I mean, I hear that maybe like further conversation about home ARP just because we have more time. But again, considering that we're in December, you know, we could just do the 300,000 in ARPA, but I think it's more meaningful if it's a larger amount because these are expensive programs, right? Like tenant-based rental assistance, you know, helping with housing in any way, shape, or form, that's expensive stuff. So I personally would be in favor of moving forward with this plan. You know, if there's a desire to think about like doing round 2 and then using the home ARP for a potential round 3, just because we have more time, I think I can see an argument for that, but because there is such a clear need in our community and because of the timing, I personally would be in favor of moving in this direction.
Chandra?
Yeah, so like Mary Alice said, like I would love to, and Jaya said, I would love to see a wider range. But given that this money is one time, I don't know if like doing something like Meals on Wheels would, like one-time money, be impactful, I guess, in a long-term way. So I think, again, going with what exists and now learning that, you know, the capacity to maybe do something more may not be there, kind of sticking to what this program and the easier lift, getting the low-hanging fruit might be, you know, what's possible right now. So,
Could you show the categories again, please? Just so people, yeah. Any other thoughts on the direction?
I just wanted to clarify. I mean, I
have a question.
Oh, sorry, Sharice.
No, well, I guess one of my questions is because I'm hearing like some really good ideas and great input regarding this. Is if in the near future, we pass this tonight, but if in January, is there a way that if there's something else that comes up that we could diversify some of those funds, is there a way that we can make an amendment or a different memo of understanding to do that, to take funds and put them toward another program? Or once we vote on it tonight, is it like, like set in stone?
The way I look at tonight is, council providing directions to staff to move forward, one way or another. If council were to say, we like this direction, move forward, again, we would work on getting the portal updated, launching the application program, doing the outreach, advertising. If we've put a figure, an amount behind that, it might be kind of hard to later say, oh, actually, we're taking 300,000 for something else, just because, again, we try to be as transparent as possible with our community, people who might be applying, organizations that might be applying. So if we say, hey, we have 400, 700, 1.2 million, whatever the amount is, I would say at that point, I think my preference would be that that's the amount we stick with, just again for transparency, and so that agencies who want to apply know how many funds are available. I think that's very helpful for organizations just to have that context. Grant agreements, however, will all be reviewed by a committee. There's members of council always serve on our grant review committees. They come back to council for approval. So down the road, you would have the ability to say yay or nay for specific grant agreements, and then if there were funds left over, again, that could be a discussion of, hey, we have a balance, what do we want to divert that to? That could be a conversation.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Mary Alice.
So I just wanted to clarify. Let me get this in real quickly, Grace. I wasn't proposing that we stand up a whole new program. Actually, what I was thinking was that in the categories that we give people for our typical social service funding, that we just either expand a category. So for example, if we want to talk about workforce development for youth, it could just not be only geared towards youth, right? It could be geared towards any age group. So if we were interested in using, and not all the 400,000, but some of the 400,000 to expand some of those categories and age groups in which they would serve, that's kind of what I was proposing. And the Meals on Wheels is just an example of something that we've funded in the past. I don't know if they would apply, but I think for that example, for Meals on Wheels, that just makes our money go a lot farther, and it also really helps those people who are leveraging those services. But that's their argument to make, not for me to make it for them. So yeah, so not a new program, and simply expanding some of the categories that we have in the social service thing was what I was thinking about.
Grace, you had a comment?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate from Grants Management Division the information and recommendation. I think the discussions tonight sound reasonable, especially with that timeliness piece here with the need and the cold season upon us. I think it's an interesting idea to retain some flexible social service money in the city account, and also understand that we would need to be able to actually execute those by reinstating or expanding some of our grant programs. Might have the advantage of spending things faster, more flexibly. So I think that, you know, for tonight, it sounds like to me the immediate question that we need to figure out tonight is at least the $300,000 for ARPA. And so I'd say that for me, doing a second round of HHI with, at the very least, the $500,000 unspent and the $300,000 ARPA, I think makes sense for me. And if we wanted to split the city money, if we retain $200,000 for city flexible grants, then that'd be $1 million for round 2 HHI. And I think that would make sense as a compromise to me. But again, it seems that the urgent question tonight is the $300,000 from ARPA.
Jaya.
I agree. I'm getting stuck on the timeline. So I like some of those ideas, and Mary Alice, I think, you know, building, again, using the infrastructure we have makes sense to me. But unless I'm incorrect, you know, the funding that we set aside is for this fiscal, well, so just, I'm going to clarify, like the funding is for this fiscal year, right? So even to expand, you know, the next round of funding for the youth services grant is going to be coming up. And I think that's, you know, council could decide for next year, we're not going to say it's youth services. We're going to say it's social services. And then it'll be up to the next council to decide what amount that is, right? Like if we set it up to say the next round is for social services and we're going to recommend that the next council approves 700,000 instead of 300 and 400, that could set up the infrastructure. And I think that, again, I agree with you, Mary Alice. I think, you know, what made it challenging is we said, we want this money there, but there wasn't the time to roll it out because we did it as a one-time, right? So now and again, I want to make it clear, I don't think this is anything against the city staff. There's only so many hours in the day. You can't just stand up a whole new program like that. But that means that we're in a position for the FY25 budget to figure out how do we spend that money in 6 months, right? So by the time you put something out there, you give people a chance to apply, you review applications. We may only have a few months to even review, like, who can spend the money really, really fast if we're talking about that FY25 money, unless there's some mechanism to extend, which I don't think there's a way to do that into the next fiscal year, unless I'm wrong. So maybe that's I know, Mary Alice, I appreciate you're agreeing with me, but I think that is a question, like, to clarify from city staff, is there any way to extend out the social service money beyond this fiscal year? Because I don't think there is.
Elizabeth?
So that could be done in the budget. I mean, as as you know, when we amend the budget, sometimes we roll forward money, for example, for capital improvement projects. So a similar thing could be done, but also to the extent the commitment is made before June 30th, it doesn't have to be spent, because once there's a commitment and a grant agreement is approved, the funds will be encumbered with a purchase order. And so at that point, it's going to automatically carry forward in the financial system if it's committed but not spent.
Because we're operating, I mean, I know on a day-to-day we operate on a modified cash, but that's because of like recognizing the accrual process. Is that correct? Essentially?
Yes.
More or less, yeah. Okay, so I guess just to make sure I'm understanding, so as we have this conversation, it sounds like there could be a mechanism to say that 400,000 we would want to be able, you know, if those funds were encumbered this fiscal year, that they could be used next fiscal year. I think that's actually important because it goes back to kind of what Grace said, and I think what Mary Alice was trying to get to. I think if there isn't, if we have a little bit more time to play with, and again, not creating something new, but potentially looking at when the FY25 application for social services goes out, if we make it a broader category and roll that 400,000 in so that we're not asking city staff to figure out how to spend it this fiscal year, but we're still using funds from this fiscal year. I hear that argument to be able to maintain some flexibility, but I would agree with Grace at the very least. I think that we need to do that 300,000 and then the home ARP if we're looking at moving the social service money somewhere else, because again, the need is huge.
Mary Alice.
Okay, so I have to apologize to Jerry because I completely understand the point that you were trying to make in terms of the timing. Because when we write the agreements, it's for the next fiscal year, but we're trying to spend this fiscal year's money. So you're absolutely right. I just wanted to go on record and say that because I was shaking my head yes when you were doing that. But given Elizabeth's guidance, it sounds like it may still be possible for us to be able to extend the amount of money that we have in the upcoming social service period, as long as they're encumbered, to be spent in fiscal year 2025. We won't lose the 400,000 that we gave this year, basically. It won't be folded back into the budget. Yeah, okay.
So then just to kind of summarize what I'm hearing, for this upcoming cycle of the Youth Services Grant Program, what I'm hearing is an expanded Youth and Adult Services Grant Program, title TBD, but along those lines. And then I also heard the recommendation from Grace of perhaps doing $1 million, the 300,000 ARPA, 500,000 home ARP, and then potentially 200,000 in the general fund for this program, and then rolling that additional 200,000 into an expanded youth and adult services program. Okay.
Are you ready for a thumbs up, thumbs down on that direction? Can't take official action tonight, but thumbs up on what you just heard? Are your thumbs up? You people in the ceiling? Yeah. Yay or nay in the ceiling?
Yeah.
2 yays?
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess, yeah, thumbs up.
Okay.
Yes, thumbs up.
All right. Does that give you the direction you need? Thank you very much. All right, we have 2 items of new business left. One is ordinance number 2024-12-040, which is an ordinance levying taxes for fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2024, ending June 30th, 2025. Elizabeth. And you might as well speak to the next ordinance too.
So you may remember that way back on November 12th, I gave you a presentation on the proposed property tax levy. And then on November 18th, you approved the estimated levy, and based on that estimated levy, then we advertised and held a public hearing. It's a kind of lengthy process we go through here, but really what you have here tonight is just the final step for the city council in levying property taxes. So the first ordinance would levy the taxes. It's consistent with what we discussed previously. And And the second ordinance would direct the county clerk to abate the tax levy to maintain our current tax rate, which is $1.34.99. So at that rate, the owner of an average home in Urbana, which is valued at about $180,000, would pay $729 in property taxes to the city of Urbana on an annual basis. And I'm happy to answer questions, but I think you've seen the whole thing before.
Chris?
Just a quick one. Is there always, okay, third of the total value of the property, and then there's a $6,000 deduction if they're owner occupied, is that correct?
Well, there are various types of exemptions. You know, there are some for veterans and for
Okay.
various other individuals, but the most common one is the owner-occupied exemption.
Okay. And this 729 that you just quoted accounts for that, or?
Correct. The $729 on a $180,000 home assumes that there is an owner-occupied exemption on that.
Any other questions for Elizabeth? Is there a motion? Mary Alice?
I will move approval of ordinance number 2024-12040, an ordinance levying taxes for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2024 and ending June 30th, 2025.
Second. Oh, sorry, is there a second?
Second.
Old habits.
Second.
Second by James. Further
Jaya second.
Oh, sorry, Jaya. Any other discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
I'm sorry, Diana, I had a question.
Oh, go ahead, Grace.
I was just wondering if we could clarify why it has for personnel costs, fire operations as the only thing listed under general corporate fund expenditures.
So I guess as a practical matter, when we levy taxes, we have to assign it to some specific expenditure. And so that's how we've chosen to assign it for the last, I'm not quite sure exactly how many years. We just ascribe it to personnel costs in the fire department.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
Yes.
Ms. Woken?
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes.
Grace, was that a yes or no?
Yes.
A yes? Okay. That motion passes. And last item is ordinance 2024-12-041, which is an ordinance directing Champaign County Clerk to abate the tax levy for the general corporate fund for the tax year beginning July 1st, 2024, ending June 30th, 2025.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mary Alice, seconded by Jaya. Any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
Yes.
Ms. Woken?
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes.
That motion passes. And with no further business before the council, we are adjourned. Thank you.